My name is Craig Campbell, and we've been with Academy Christian since last year, but just about a year. So I was born into a relatively secular family, was sprinkle baptized Methodist when I was a kid, but basically didn't do anything as far as going to church, reading the Bible, or anything like that. Got into college and read a piece by Clarence Darrow, Why I Am an Agnostic, and that kind of set the tone for the next couple decades, and that was for me to be faithless, accept faith in myself, and that's kind of how I lived until we got to the point where we had a daughter in 1985 and a boy 2 years after that. And then I was working my way up the career ladder and got to the point where I was just promoted to Vice President of Human Resources. And just after that, our daughter turned 15, and that's when she started to have some behavior issues and some relationship issues, and that then kind of set things on a different direction. So tried to keep the family going, stay under control again, once believing that I could do everything myself, and then got to the point where it was September 10 of 2004. We had gone through a period where our daughter needed to be reined in a little bit more than she was. So I actually had to quit my job and stay home in order to have a presence, because we couldn't really trust her home by herself. So that was about a year before. So then in 2004, I was starting to lighten up a little bit, give her some more discretion on her own. And on that night, September 10, 2004, she went off on a trip with her boyfriend. And right after midnight, our son, who was living with us still, he was 15 at that time, knocked on our bedroom door, woke us up, and informed us that he had received a call from the boyfriend, and our daughter had been in an accident, and they thought it wasn't that huge of a deal, but we needed to call the emergency room. So we did, and we were living in Orange County, and where my daughter went on her little trip with her boyfriend was up in Kern County, which is 150 miles north from where we were. So we we called the emergency room. The doctor told us it looks like she hit her head. She had some blood out of the left ear. We've taken tests. We think it's just a concussion and a broken eardrum. But you might as well get in the car, come on up here anyway. So we started the 3-hour drive up there, just east or west of Bakersfield, and halfway there my wife's cell phone rang, and this time it was a different doctor, and it seemed a little more pressing. I could hear the wheels flopping on the gurney as they were taking her in for emergency surgery. And so he told us, you better hurry and get here, which conveyed to me that her life was in jeopardy. So I had never prayed in my life, but at that point, on the way up in the car halfway there, I said, if you're up there, and I didn't even know who I was talking to, if you save my daughter's life, I will read your book. That was my promise. So that's about as far as I was willing to go. We got to the hospital at about 5 o'clock in the morning. The boyfriend was there off to the side, and we were there for just a few minutes, and the doctor walked in and asked, who is Kristen's father? And so I stood up, and it kind of scared both of us, my wife and I, because he wouldn't talk to my wife. He took me aside off to the corner and started to talk. And between when he made the announcement, who is the father, and by the time we got to where he wanted to sit and talk, I had pretty much conditioned myself that she had not made it, that she had passed away. So he started to tell me a story, and the story was that my letting up and easing the conditions we had set for our daughter to behave herself more. The letting up was her boyfriend had bought 2 quads, 2 ATVs, terrain vehicles with the 4 wheels, and she had tried to convince us it'd be safe, everything was going to be okay and all of that. She had never ridden anything like that in her life, and so they went off together on this camping trip. I had them promise me that she would be trained, she would wear a helmet, and it would all be done in a way that would be safe. And the doctor explained to me that what had happened is that she arrived at the campground with the boyfriend. The boyfriend went off somewhere to get another friend. Didn't come back. There was, they were consuming adult beverages in the campground, so our daughter partook of that, and it got dark, and she fell asleep, and the boyfriend hadn't arrived. So she woke up, everybody was asleep and, passed out or whatever you want to say in the camp area. And so she decided in a fit of rage that she was going to do this all on herself, on her own. So she figured out how to start one of the quads. She got on it. She left her helmet there, took off into the darkness, and ran into a large boulder and had a significant turnover accident. Banged her head against a rock, semi-conscious. But a short while later, the boyfriend did show up at the camp and looked around, saw the quad was gone, saw that Kristen was gone, and put two and two together. And right then, a sheriff pulled up in his cruiser. He was just cruising through the campground, make sure everything was okay. And there was commotion going on, so we asked what was up. And when they explained it to him, he put together a search party. And so they went off in different directions into the desert and found her semi-conscious laying there. They were making the initial decision to just they saw the little trickle of blood, but she was somewhat coherent and thought it was just going to be a bang on the head. Let's take her back to the camp, put her in a car, drive her to the clinic, whatever clinic was nearby, and do that. But there was a nurse in the campground. She came over and she looked at the injury. She talked to my daughter for a minute and immediately told the sheriff, call for the helicopter. You need to get her some care immediately. And so they did the life flight helicopter, took her over to Kern Medical Center, and that's then what started the emergency room treatment, which was the initial conversation I had. And then the second one was that night, in the hospital, apparently the regular duty physician was not there. So substituting for him was the chief brain surgeon. And he then was wandering, I guess, through the emergency room, looking at charts, looking at people, and saw her and saw the condition and all that. He said, we need some more tests to make sure that it isn't just a concussion, it isn't just a broken eardrum. Did the tests and immediately realized that there was a lot of blood welling up inside her head. Epidermal hematoma, I think is how he later explained it to me. And so pressure building up, and if they didn't do something right away, she would not make it. So they wheeled her up into the operating theater, and they spent the next 3 hours drilling a hole inside of her head and relieving the pressure and cauterizing whatever was leaking. And that then was when we showed up. The doctor then relayed to me, after telling me this story about what had led up to her accident, that she had made it. They were confident, he was confident that she was going to pull through, but most likely due to where the injury was, the severity of it, what they had to do inside her head in order to cure everything, that she might not walk again, she might not talk again, she might have to go through extensive rehab. So his prognosis was a month or two there at Kern Medical Center and then transfer down to another facility in Orange County. She would then have to go through physical therapy, speech therapy, and it was going to be a long and extensive process, but bottom line is she was going to live, he thought. We went up to the ICU. We went up to the post-op ICU, the intensive care unit, and saw her there, and she looked like she was in pretty bad shape, and you can imagine after that kind of a surgery and her injury and all of that. And so when she started to wake up, she was exhibiting the kind of behavior that he had described. She might be incoherent, she may not really know who you are. There was a lot of prep that he was giving us to make sure that we weren't shocked by what we were presented with. And lo and behold, when she started to come out of her anesthesia and all of that, she was mumbling, she was upset because she couldn't go back to class. She was saying the teachers, she said, were mean to her. It turned out what she was talking about is the nurses and the doctors wouldn't let her go home. And she was translating it to something that she could understand better, which was a school experience. So she ends up then, over the period of the next several hours, becoming coherent, answering questions. She knew who we were. She knew where she was. She knew what was going on, what had happened. She didn't know anything from the time she took off into the wilderness until the time when she, arrived at the emergency room. But she was pretty much there. So that was a big relief. So over the next day or so, Eve was working, so she needed to go back to work. This was now a Saturday morning. She needed to go back to work for Monday. I had quit my job. She was now the breadwinner. And so she left us there on Sunday and went off home. And so when that happened, they brought in, to begin with, the physical therapist. And he went through got out the little rubber hammer, and he's tapping her knee and all of that. And everything went very well. And so he was very surprised that with the extent of the injury still, the way that she was responding physically was fine. It was way beyond what he expected at that point. So then he did his little, putting things down on the chart, and then he went away, and then a period of hours goes by, and then the speech therapist comes in and gives her the lazy brown fox jumped over the fence kind of stuff, and had her, who is this man standing behind you? That's my dad. And do you know what year it is? You went through all of that, and she aced it. My daughter is really good at taking tests. So anyway, he wrote down that she was perfect as far as where she should be at that point in her recovery. And the next thing was, now we're going on to Monday and Tuesday, and on those days then the actual brain surgeon that had performed the procedure, it was a teaching hospital, so he brought in his interns, one of those scenes you see in the movie where he walks in and he's got all the crowd of younger potential doctors with him, and they all crowd around the bed, and he goes through what had happened and what he had did to save her life and all that, taking all the credit in the laps, and that's fine, but I know I'm starting to realize there's something bigger going on here than just what was going on. The sheriff being there, the nurse being there, the brain surgeon being there. There's something bigger going on. So what I end up doing then, after then getting to the point where our daughter Kristen was released from the hospital with the understanding that she doesn't need to go through rehab. She can just do it at home. She doesn't need the speech therapy. She's gaining her sense of coherence so quickly. Therapy in that regard would not be necessary. So just take her home. So from Saturday night or Saturday morning until when we drove her home, 4 days. No more hospital. We had to take her in every month or two and have her checked and then do x-rays and that kind of stuff. But she was fine and recovered perfectly. So I then was faced with, I made a promise, I called out a prayer, and that prayer was that if whoever's up there will save my daughter, I will read your book. And so I did. And I didn't even know what book to read. I started with the Quran, and that didn't work out well. So then I tried the Buddhist teachings and all that. That didn't spark what needed to be sparked. So then I started reading the Bible, the Christian Bible, and I started reading the Gospels. And now it really started to inhabit me. The Holy Spirit started to do his work. I really felt like there was something there. And I started, for the first time in my life, I felt faith and connection. So over the next year and a half, I continued to read the Bible, get deeper into the faith, to the point then in December of 2006, my wife and I, she took me to a Christmas Eve service at one of the churches there in Orange County. And I really, as soon as I walked in, it was different than any time I'd been in a church in my life. There was just a feeling of warmth, connection, and that I really belonged there. A month later, the beginning of the year service, in January of 2007, the pastor got up and did his sermon, and when he finished his sermon, he then started to say, and if you believe, you can stand up, raise your hand, and I had no idea what an altar call was. That's how naive I was. And I leaned over to my wife and I said, why isn't everybody standing up? There's 10,000 people here. Why aren't they all standing up? They're all believers, aren't they? And then it dawned on me. He was just asking for people that had never made a profession of faith before to be the ones that would stand up. And so I did. I stood up. The Holy Spirit helped me stand up. And I said, I believe. And Eve, my wife, who had already really believed, but just as support to me, I think, more than anything else, did the same. And 3 months later, after we went through a new believer class, we were both baptized together there at the church in April of 2007. Since then, my faith has continued to grow. I am feeling very close to the Lord. Our family, Kristen, then our daughter came to the Lord. Our son later on has come to the Lord. And now we're this, family unit of believers.